Hi, my name is Shriram, and today I'm going to talk about how to solve a quadratic equation. So there are many ways to solve a quadratic equation, but there are two main ways to solve a quadratic equation that I'm going to talk about in my two video series. The first way is by factoring, and honestly I think this is the easiest method since most of the questions that we get are like really small numbers, and factoring I think is the fastest way to solve a quadratic equation using small numbers. But if we have larger numbers, then the other way is to use the quadratic formula, which I'm going to talk about in the second video. Okay guys, so let's dive into it. So for factoring, you need to know two major equations or formulas. Forms. So the first form is standard form. Y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. There's also another form called the vertex form, but I'll be talking about that later in the video. So a, b, and c are all real rational numbers, and let's take an example of an equation in this form. So maybe let's take y equals 2x squared plus 4x plus 2. And first, what I like to do is factor out the common term. So step 1 for solving an equation in this form is to factor out the common term. So as you can see, the common term is 2. So if you factor out the 2, you get x squared plus 2x plus 1. And as you can see, we've just changed the form from ax squared plus bx plus c to x squared plus bx plus c, which makes factoring this or solving this equation easier. So we have x squared plus 2x plus 1. So the second step is to make an x table, is what I call it. So for now, let's just ignore the 2. So let's just solve this alone. So 2x x squared plus 2x plus 1. So for our x table, on the left side is equal to AC. So for now, A is 1. So 1 times 1 is equal to 1. So on our left side, we get 1. And then on our right side is our b value, which is 2. So we have two values here, and we need to find which two values multiply to 1 and add up to 2. So if we do this, 1 plus 1 is 2, and 1 times 1 is 1. So we can expand this equation and write it as x squared plus x plus 1. So we can make this into two different expressions. And to factor this, since x is common in this parentheses, we can factor out the x. So this is x plus 1 plus, and then we need to make sure that this parentheses is the same as this, and it's already the same, so we can just factor out a 1, x plus 1. So then we get x plus 1, and these two are also x plus 1, so we get x plus 1, x plus 1. And since we have a 2 here, we can bring that down, so now we have 2x plus 1, x plus 1. So we have factored this equation, 2x squared plus 4x plus 2. So now, since we have factored it, it's easier to find the zeros or the x-intercepts. So let's find the zeros slash x-intercepts. So to find the zeros, we need to set up both of the parentheses equal to 0. So x plus 1 is equal to 0, and the other x plus 1 equals 0. So if we solve for x, we get x is equal to -1 for both, since they're both the same. So our only zero is -1 comma 0. So we found our zeros and our x-intercepts, and we found the factored form. So now let's dive in to this other form that we call our vertex form. So our vertex form is written as y is equal to a times x minus h squared plus k, where h comma k is the vertex. And if you don't know what a vertex is, it's the lowest or highest point of a parabola. So this point is a vertex. So let's look at our standard form equation, which is y is equal to 2x squared plus 4x plus 2. So to get our x value, or our h value for our vertex, that's also equal to the axis of symmetry. Since h comma k is a vertex, the axis of symmetry is a line passing through the middle of the parabola. So using this, the axis of symmetry is equal to -b over 2a, or our h value. So our b in this equation is 4. So that's equal to -4 over 2 times 2, which is equal to -4 over 4, which is equal to -1. So we can use this -1 and substitute that into this equation. So y is equal to f of x, which is f of -1, which is equal to 2 times -1 squared plus 4 times -1 plus 2, which is equal to 2 minus 4 plus 2, which is equal to -2 plus 2, which is equal to 0. So our vertex is 0, which happens to be our our vertex is 0, -1 comma 0, which also happens to be our x-intercept, which is not always the case, but I think in this quadratic equation that's the case. So we can write our vertex form as y is equal to, so a is 2, so 2 times x plus 1 squared, so that's our vertex form. So now, since we have a vertex form, we can start to make a table which will help us to finally graph the final equation. So let's make a table of values. So x goes on this side, and f of x goes on the other side. So let's use our vertex form, and for this we can just substitute values using this equation, y is equal to 2x plus 1 squared. So if we take -1, we get 0. We already know that since that's our vertex. Now let's do the same for 0. So 2 0 plus 1 squared, 2, 1 squared, 2. Since 1 squared is 1, 1 times 2 is 2. So we get 2. For 1, 2, 1 plus 1 squared, 2, 2 squared. So 2 squared is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. So you get 8, 2. We can do equals 2, 2 plus 1 squared, 2, 3 squared, which is equal to 9, 18. So you can kind of see a pattern here. So as you can see, 2 times whatever x is plus 1 squared is the y value. So if x is 3, then this value, 3 plus 1 is 4 squared. 16 times 2 is 32. So 3 is 32. Alright, so I think we need to find 2 more values. Let's find 2 more values. So for 4, 2, 5 squared is equal to, so 5 squared is 25. 25 times 2 is 50. So for 4, the value is 50. Let's do the same for the 6th value. So 2, 6 squared is equal to 36. 36 times 2. So let's just do some scratch work. It's 12, sorry. 72. So for 5, the value is 72. Okay, so now since we have our table, we can use this table to graph our equation. So we have this graph right here, and we can use this table. So since this goes till 72, we can use maybe intervals of 10 for the x-axis and -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 for the y-axis. So that's the y-axis, and then for the x-axis, we can use intervals of 10. Okay, I think that's all we need. Okay, so for -1, it's 0. So that's -1 comma 0. For 0, it's 2. So that's like about over here. And then for 1, it's 8. It's about over here. 2, 18. 3, 32. 4, 50. 5, 72. Those are all the 7 points, and it's the same the other way around. So okay, so for -2, it's 2. -3, it's 8. -4, it's 18. -5, it's 32. -6, it's 50. And -7's 72, which is like over here. So using this points, we can just connect all these points. So that's the parabola for this equation. Y is equal to, sorry, let's just look at our equation. Yep, we have this. Y is equal to 2x squared plus 4x plus 2. So that's the final equation, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you. And I'll be making a second video on how to use the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic equation. Thanks.